Natalia.
And I'm Brian.
And we're the
Daily Plant.
We're both graduate students at Binghamton University. I'm studying sustainability.
And I'm studying ecological genetics. So the Daily Plant is a channel that we made to give you guys tips and tricks to help you grow your own plants.
Today we're going to be talking about cuttings. Cuttings can be a great way to get into the plant world, but there are some pros and cons you should consider. One of the pros is that cuttings are cheap. Full-grown plants can be expensive, but you can get a bunch of cuttings for the same price as one full-grown plant.
There are some cons with cuttings, however. One of the first ones is that a lot of them will die in the process. It's okay if you lose 10 to 15% of them. Another con of cuttings is that they're extremely care intensive. They require a lot more water and in a lot of cases a lot more humidity than normal plants do. The third one is that it's going to take a lot longer for these guys to become big mature plants, so if you happen to have the funds for a larger, more mature plant, then maybe that's a better option.
First, we're going to start off with how you can actually take those cuttings.
So, the very first thing you want to consider when you're taking a cutting is that you're going to want to take it from a nice, big, healthy part of the plant. If you take a cutting that's too small, it might not have enough energy to keep photosynthesizing or to push out roots. The next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure that you take the cutting at a 45-degree angle to the stem. Now what that's going to do is it's going to maximize the amount of surface area on that cut so you can get the most water into the plant and give it the most surface area to push out roots. Another important thing you're going to want to do is make sure that you take off one or two of the leaves closest to the bottom of the plant. Now what that's going to do is it's going to give us this nice big long stem. That way you can fit it more into the container nicely and you're going to be able to see it pushing out near the water here.
In most cases, it's best to take cuttings in early spring. This is because this is right before the plant flowers. If the plant is flowering and you take a cutting, that means that it's devoting more energy to building those flowers instead of to producing roots, which is what you want when you have a cutting.
So there are two main methods by which we can actually make these cuttings. The first one is to take your cuttings and then plant them into water. And the second one is to take your cuttings and plant them into soil. There are a little bit of pros and cons to each, so we're going to go through those.
So there's 3 benefits to having your plants in water. The first is that it can prevent against infection because you can change out water that has bacterial growth. The second is that you don't have to worry about keeping your plant hydrated. And the third is that you can watch your cutting grow and grow new roots.
So now soil. So soil is really good because it typically takes a little bit faster, right? You're already putting the plant into its natural environment where roots are supposed to grow. Another one is that you can use rooting hormone. So rooting hormone is really awesome because it just helps the plant to push out its roots a whole lot faster, but it doesn't really work in water. So this is, if you're planning on using this, make sure to put it in soil. Another really big pro about using soil is that you don't have to worry about taking this very weak cutting after its roots have developed and then transferring it into soil. Sometimes this actually also is another way the plants can die. Another big pro is that some plants can't even root without the rooting hormone, which doesn't work in water, so sometimes you just have to root them in the soil. Overall, if you're not sure about whether or not your plant should go into water or soil, just use rooting hormone and put it in soil.
Once you've decided if you want to put your cuttings in water or soil, here's some tips to take care of them. So if you're keeping your cuttings in water, make sure the node is a bit under the water. The node is the part of the stem that a leaf is coming off of. It's also important to make sure you change the water frequently, about once every 3 to 5 days. Also, it helps if you use a clear container because then you can see root growth and check if the water has any bacteria, which could lead to infection. Another thing to keep in mind is that the container that you're putting the cutting in shouldn't have been washed with soap. That can be toxic to the plant.
So now soil. So with soil, the first thing you're going to do after you cut it and after you remove the first couple leaves is you're going to take a little bit of rooting hormone and put it into a separate container. This is because we don't want to contaminate the actual bottle. So you're going to take a little bit of rooting hormone, put it in some other smaller container, and then you're going to take your cutting and you're going to dip the first inch of the cutting into rooting hormone. After that, all you're going to do is take this cutting and put it right into soil. And as far as watering goes, you have to keep in mind the fact that A, it isn't being stuck into a jar of water, and B, that it doesn't have any roots. So the only way water is actually getting to the body of the plant is through the little hole in the stem. So you have to make sure that you keep the soil nice and moist. If you see the top of the soil getting dry whatsoever, make sure to put more water on. A good rule of thumb for the moisture of the water is that if you take a little bit of the soil and you pinch it between your fingers and any water drops out, it's too wet. Another important thing to mention, keeping in mind the fact that cuttings dry out really easy, is that you want to try to maintain a humid environment. So the best way to maintain humidity in a cutting is to take a clear plastic bag, put it over the actual pot and poke a few holes so that you can have some airflow going. And what this is going to do is this is going to trap the moisture in the air around the plant to keep the entire area humid. So now that you have the bag around the plant, there are a couple different considerations to keep in mind though. The first thing is that you want to keep it out of direct sunlight. Otherwise what's going to happen is you're going to get a greenhouse effect and it might get too hot and kill your cutting. And then as far as lighting goes otherwise, just make sure that you try to keep it in bright indirect sunlight. But like I said, try to avoid direct sunlight to avoid overheating of your plant.
So the requirements for succulents are a bit different. If you have a sedum or echeveria plant, you can take a leaf or a stem cutting. If you're taking a leaf cutting, make sure you take a big leaf and you twist it all the way off to the base.
So it turns out that the growth point for a lot of these plants is actually located at the point where the stem meets the leaf. So if you rip off the succulent leaf and you don't rip off the entire thing, that growth point isn't going to be on the succulent and it won't root.
With succulents, you want to make sure the cutting is left out to dry for 1 to 3 days because this allows the area that you cut to callus over. This prevents infection.
So when you do a leaf cutting, the first thing you want to make sure you do is that you put the very, very tip of the leaf into the soil, but nothing else. This is because succulent leaves have a habit of rotting, and if you let it come into contact with the soil too long, it's probably going to rot. But for stems, you don't really have that problem, so you can just stick the entire thing into the soil. As far as watering goes for succulents, it's pretty similar to other cuttings. Make sure that the soil is moist but not soggy, and make sure that there isn't really any water pooling in the leaves, because that could also cause rot. If you guys are lucky, after a couple weeks, you're going to get something that looks like this.
To see if your cutting's successfully rooting, you can give it a little bit of a tug. If there's any resistance, that means there's a root system growing.
Alright guys, so hopefully you've tried this out and you've gotten some growth and gotten some success. If that's the case, congratulations. In the future, we're going to try to do a little bit more specific stuff. For example, begonias have some really interesting propagation rules, and some other plants also do. So expect to see one of those in the future.
You ready? Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe if you want more plant info or sleepy kittens. Bye, Bob.
He's like, I'm going to kill you guys. No joke.
That's beautiful.
I gotta be like correct. Do you like that?
Yeah.
Oh, it didn't record. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Feeling it. Slimy. Whoa. A lot harder than I thought you'd do it. It's on camera.